You've probably heard a lot about teacher burnout, right? It's a huge issue. But today, we're diving into a silent crisis, one that's happening in a super specialized field, educating deaf and hard of hearing students. We're going to look at why these specific teachers are under such intense pressure and how the very technology that's supposed to help might actually be making things a whole lot worse. Okay, let's just start with one number that, honestly, it says it all. 93%. That's how many teachers for the deaf and hard of hearing say they're feeling the effects of burnout. This isn't just a job being a little tough. We're talking about a crisis that's pushing almost an entire profession to its absolute breaking point. So, how are we going to unpack all this? Well, first we'll dig into what this silent crisis really is. Then we'll look at the promise of technology and, well, the reality of it. We're going to get into what burnout actually feels like for a teacher. And finally, we'll uncover the one thing that turns out to matter more than any app or gadget. All right, so let's dive right into our first section, a silent crisis. Because before we can even begin to talk about burnout, you have to understand the incredible, unique pressures these educators are dealing with day in and day out. You see, the problem is coming from two sides at once. On one side, you have students who are deaf or hard of hearing, who often face this persistent achievement gap. And on the other, there's a massive shortage of the qualified teachers needed to close that gap. The turnover is so high that schools are just constantly scrambling to fill positions. And this is why the job is just so incredibly demanding. I mean, we call them teachers, but look at this list. They're also language specialists. They're tech support for really complex hearing devices. They're case managers for individualized education plans, or IEPs. A lot of times, they're even designing the curriculum from the ground up. This massive, often invisible workload is a huge driver of burnout. Okay, so with a workload like that, technology seems like the obvious hero, right? The perfect solution to lighten the load. So let's take a look at the promise it holds. You know, when researchers want to figure out if people will actually use new tech, they have this framework called the Technology Acceptance Model, or TAM. It's actually pretty straightforward. For a teacher to get on board with a new tool, they have to believe two things. One, that it's genuinely useful, and two, that it's not going to be a huge pain to learn and use. Simple as that. So in a perfect world, this would be a beautiful, simple process, wouldn't it? Step 1, a school introduces some new tech. Step 2, it works great, it cuts down on planning time, lightens the workload, and then boom, step 3, teacher burnout goes way down. If only it were that easy. And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. Technology isn't some magic bullet here. It's really a double-edged sword. Let's look at how the exact same tools can be both a huge help and a huge burden. And you can see that conflict laid out so clearly right here. On one hand, tech can be a total lifeline. It can save a ton of time creating new materials and help students become more independent. But on the other hand, it can be a massive burden, adding hours of troubleshooting, especially when there's no training, or when the tech itself isn't designed with accessibility in mind. Okay, so we've been throwing this word burnout around a lot, but what does it actually feel like? What does it mean for the person going through it? Let's deconstruct the human reality at the center of this whole crisis. Experts usually break burnout down into 3 main parts, or pillars. The first one is emotional exhaustion, and this is exactly what it sounds like. It's that feeling of being completely and totally drained, like you've got nothing left in the tank to give anyone. The second pillar is something called depersonalization. And this is kind of a defense mechanism, you know? The stress gets so intense that you start to detach emotionally. You might even become a little cynical, just as a way to cope and protect yourself. And the third pillar, which is maybe the most heartbreaking, is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. This is when teachers start to feel like they're not good at their jobs anymore, like they're not really making a difference. And for someone who went into teaching to help kids, well, that's just crushing. So, if just throwing new tech at the problem isn't the answer, then what is? Well, it all comes down to these hidden factors, the things that decide whether a new app leads to success or just adds one more layer of stress. And the research here is crystal clear. It is not about the tech, it is about the context. The single biggest factor is the school environment. Does the administration actually have the teachers' backs? Is there proper funding for good resources and real training? Is the school culture supportive? And, this is a big one, do teachers get a say in choosing the tools that actually work for them and their students? These are the things that make all the difference. Which leads us to the single most important idea in all of this. The focus has to shift. It can't be about finding the perfect piece of technology. It has to be about supporting the human being who's supposed to use it. When you support the teacher, the tech becomes a powerful tool. But without that support, it's just another burden.
So when you put it all together, the takeaway is pretty clear, isn't it? You can't fix this crisis by just buying a new software subscription. You have to build an entire ecosystem of support around the teacher. That is the only way you can reduce burnout and make sure technology actually works for everyone.
And that leaves all of us with one final and I think really provocative question. It's a question that every school administrator, every policymaker, and honestly, all of us should be asking. Are we trying to solve for the technology, or are we truly trying to solve for the teacher?